I got the biggest smile on my face because woke up this morning and I told my wife, she's like, what do you have to do today? And are you taking the kids or am I taking the kids? I said, no, I'll take the kids today because all I have to do is interview one of the men responsible for inventing Amazon Prime. And my wife just stopped for a second. She turned over and she was like, oh, you're trying to flex on me today. Yes, I am. I tell you, when you make friends in the world, you don't have to be good at anything else except just being yourself. And I was at Secret Knock in Las Vegas. I'm the co-host of that with my buddy, Greg Reed. I wanted to deliver a funny story that morning. I was reading Proverbs 12 and I thought, how can I deliver this in a different, unique way? So I told the audience that I read an article in the New York Times and it was Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk. And they got interviewed and these are the 10 things that they said to create a foolproof marketing plan. And everyone just stopped. You could hear a pin drop. And I started listing off all these things and everyone just writing. And then I got down to the end and I said, oh, and the 11th point is that actually wasn't Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. It was actually Proverbs 12 in the Bible written 3,000 years ago. And you could hear a pin drop at that point. I'm laughing, but it took a while for the people to laugh. As I walked off, I didn't know that the joke was on me because as I'm walking off, Ethan, who you're going to meet here in a second, walks up to me and he shakes my hand. He goes on stage and then he says, the first thing he says after when he gets on stage getting interviewed, right after I said this, is he's like, I knew that punchline was coming because I actually worked day by day with Jeff Bezos as a vice president for Amazon. And it didn't sound like Jeff at all. And the whole audience started laughing. He comes off stage and we shake hands and we had a true connection moment. And I tell you, I get to share with you not only one of the most incredible leaders that is in this on this planet today with you in Ethan Evans, but also more importantly, I get to share with you one of my now friends. And it's going to be incredible. We're going to go into that, but he spent 15 years with Amazon, helped to invent Amazon Prime, Amazon Video, Amazon App Store, Merch by Amazon, Prime Gaming, which was formerly Twitch Prime, and Twitch Commerce. He led global teams of over 800 and holds more than 70 patents. Ethan has reviewed 10,000 resumes and conducted 2,500 interviews, made 1,000 plus hires, and was an Amazon bar raiser and bar raiser core leader. And I tell you, there's no one better in the world at taking leaders and turning them into true executives than this man here. So it's my honor, my pleasure to bring to you Mr. Ethan Evans. Let's get this party started.
Nothing more on my mind. I got two shines, so every day I grind. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to win. Defeat never know, cause I will not lose. They wanna mimic my moves, but can't walk in my shoes.
I think the only thing that this man has not done is discover the moon. But we were talking about it earlier, and I believe, Ethan, is it true that you discovered the moon also?
Absolutely. I don't want to take too much credit for things, so I let, after I discovered it, I used my time machine to go back and tip some people off in history so they'd look smart.
Help me with this, because this phrase I heard so many times, and as an entrepreneur, you'll hear it. If you're a business owner, you'll hear it. That's not my job.
Oh, you're poking the bear, and you obviously know it. So I just hate that phrase because, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, everything has to be your job. But the reason I dislike that phrase so much is early in my career, long before I was at Amazon, I was at a small company in Pennsylvania. I went and talked to a guy I knew and I thought we were friends. And I suggested to him, you could make your work better by doing, by adding this detail or that detail to what you were putting out. And he said, well, that's not my job. Would you like to see my job description? And he had come to our company from AT&T, like the old telephone company, not even the modern cell phone company. And he literally wanted to show me a piece of paper for what he was supposed to do. And I just thought, wow, you're not even telling me like my idea is bad or wrong or doesn't make sense or it's too much work. It's just, that's not my job. My piece of paper says I do this. And it blew me away so much that it stuck with me. And then the rest of the probably reason it's resonated with me is fast forward like 15 years, I'm at Amazon. Amazon was working on its famous leadership principles that define how people in the company should get things done. And we had an internal principle about ownership, and they were considering cutting it because they thought it was covered elsewhere. And I and some other people argued and said, no, this isn't. It isn't covered. And so we were invited, like, okay, if you think it's so important, why don't you write it? And so along with a couple other people, I drafted language and it was eventually accepted. And the piece that got kept that I wrote was, a leader never says that's not my job. And so I certainly feel very strongly for that. It doesn't mean you have to do everything yourself, though. It just means you have to make sure it gets done. So if there's stuff that doesn't fit you, find someone it does fit. Find someone who loves to do it, or find a way to get it done. But owning it doesn't mean it's all you doing it. It just means you own getting it done.
Ethan, what's the difference between a leader? You've spoke about this, but the difference between a leader and an executive, like a true executive, because it's to have the connection point that you do. And we were talking about it before we started recording. That part, it was mind blowing to me because I thought they were one and the same.
Yeah. So, all these words get used interchangeably somewhat, right? Manager, leader, executive, et cetera. So then when you try to slice down to what do they really mean, a leader can be lots of things. A leader can be a political leader. They can be a leader on a football team. Even within a company, they can be someone with some vision. An executive is usually responsible for a large division. They're part of the management team of the whole company, so they are setting the vision. And I think the big thing, though, is they do have to be very comfortable with responsibility, because if your decisions are wrong, number one, it's going to impact a lot of people. And number two, there are very few second chances. There are second chances, but I guess there are no third chances, right? You'd better, because companies can't afford to have someone who's, you mentioned I led teams of 800. They can't afford to have someone sending 800 people down the wrong road too much. That gets really expensive, right? Like Amazon people are well paid because they're in technology. That 800 person team probably costs $150 million a year just to pay for them. And so if I'm misspending that, I'm on a very short leash. And part of executive leadership is being comfortable with that, making the right decisions, getting things done that bring the ultimate measure is, did you bring in more than you spent?
I was just talking with my buddy Michael Cruz yesterday. He's a CFO of a credit union. Their revenue, I believe, is he moved from a larger one to this one. I think they're just over $1 billion that they utilize. And he was talking about executive positions where the pressures are different at the different levels. And I said, well, how do you manage that? Because a lot of times when you put a high amount of pressure on the top level executives, they have the tendency to transfer that down to the person who they're working with, which their pay doesn't constitute that type of pressure, and then they push it down to the person that even has less pay, which is more pressure. How do you keep it where you can apply different pressures, but it stays in that realm, in the executive realm?
I think it's giving people a contained task. So you want them to understand the whole picture of what you're trying to achieve. You want to give them the big vision so they feel like they're working towards something, and they can think about it and like, where does my part fit in? But then you give them the freedom of, look, the overall success or failure of this effort is on me. And as long as you do your part, you're doing good work. And so that's how you sort of free them, is you give them success criteria that you do your part. Now, the one place where that is true and that works 99% of the time. The issue is if you look at it kind of like a ship, and I'm saying like, hey, you work in the engine room and you work in the kitchen or whatever, and as long as everybody does their job, people will get fed on the ship, and you know the engines will run. The problem is if I, as the captain, steer it into a rock, we all sink together. So I can give you freedom, but you do have to have trust or believe that like I or somebody is going to steer it safely to the destination. And so that is the pressure, right? That's why the captain goes down with the ship, though, right? That's why that saying there is like, you own the ship, it's your problem.
How do you go from when you hired thousands of people, you've
Yes.
reviewed millions or thousands of resumes? How do you go from the pleasantries to the credibility, then to the accountability, or to the execution, and then to the accountability? Because a lot of times people just jump to the accountability immediately without creating the relationship, but you seem to connect with people on a level that I've never seen before.
Oh, well, now you're flattering me, because I doubt that I connect on a level you've never seen before. But thank you. I'll take it.
Well, I say this, Ethan, because honestly, like you and I shared a laugh. We shared a laugh at Secret Knock. When you came off stage, like there was a place where a person could have been like, that dude was wrong, because I went up before you. I said what I said. I was delivering, and you came up and you looked me in my eye. You shook my hand. We had a laugh, and it was almost like you made me feel like there was no one else in the room at the time when everyone was vying for your time. Right. And so I'm speaking from experience with you. And when I say that, I truly mean that from my heart, my man.
Well, thank you. I mean, so as an engineer, right, the stereotype of engineers is we're low social skill geeks, that like to sit in dark rooms and play video games and eat pizza and not talk to anybody. And that is kind of where I started my career, more so. But I found I knew someone who said, look, well, you interview, you'll understand this. I listened. Someone asked Larry King how he could talk to anybody. And he basically said it just requires being interested in them, like to see them as a person and realize this person has a story. And so I always begin from the idea of this person sitting across from me has something interesting about them that I don't know yet. And I'm going to go find it. And when you focus on somebody, like I didn't know you. I had heard from our mutual friend, Brian Gallinger, that you were a great guy, but I hadn't met you yet. I'm like, okay, I've heard good things about Kelly. Let me learn his story. Why is he here? What does he do? How did he get this awesome collection of sport coats and cool hats? How do I learn more about him? And that's where the connection comes from, is people love it when you're interested in them. And I can almost always find legitimate interest in anyone. I was recently talking to my wife, and she was asking, why is it you try and keep connection with people who are mean to you or who do something bad in your life? Why don't you just close the door? And I said, well, it feels like a death to me to close a door on someone, because as long as we're both alive, there's always hope of a positive relationship. And so given I have that philosophy of like every relationship can be repaired or made better, that's where it comes from.
Take me back to the early times. Like you retired from Amazon as vice president 4 years
Yeah.
ago. You were with them for over 15 years. Take me
Yes.
back to the beginning, because a lot of times people say, well, I would love, it would be so awesome. It's just rainbows and butterflies for Ethan in Amazon. But take us back to when we didn't have Amazon Prime, when we didn't have the merch by Amazon, the App Store, things like that. How did those kind of things come into fruition? What's the thought process and the type of freedoms that you had in Amazon early on?
Yeah. So, I joined Amazon in 2005, right before their sort of 10-year anniversary. But at that time, Amazon still only sold physical things. So, the biggest division in the company, this will take people back, was called BMVD. It stood for books, music, VHS, DVD. So it was CDs, VHS, and DVD, and of course, printed books were the big business. And when I took the job, I wondered, am I making a huge career mistake? Because I wondered, am I joining the IT department of a bookstore? Like, is it sort of like going to work for, Nordstrom or Walmart or Kroger or whatever you have? Am I sort of just going into the IT department to help run cash register systems or something? And Amazon was very secretive. They wouldn't tell me what I was being hired for. They said, it's a new project and we can't tell you about it. Do you want the job or not? And I was like, well, my current startup is kind of sinking. The captain had hit a rock and I wasn't the captain there. And so I'm like, yes, I want off this boat and you have a boat. So, sure. So I moved to Seattle. And it turned out the challenge was the founder, Jeff Bezos, had decided physical stuff's going to go away. People are going to read more online. They're going to listen to music digitally, no more CDs, and they're going to watch movies online somehow. Now you have to really realize this is back when Netflix was still mailing you things in the little red envelopes, not at all a streaming service, not at all. They wouldn't become that for a couple more years. And it's when YouTube wasn't owned by Google and like nobody knew about it. It was just starting. So I was given the job, figure out how to put movies and TV online. And that was the whole, there was no plan. We thought of all kinds of plans. Like you may recall that you can actually burn your own DVD, right? You can put stuff on a DVD. One of our thoughts was, we'll let you decide what you want to watch for the week. We'll burn a custom DVD for you and send it to you with like the TV shows you want to see this week. We had, other ideas that thankfully we didn't follow. But we had, these different sort of crazy ideas of how can we get movies online, because the movie industry was very scared of piracy. They had seen MP3s and music piracy, and they were like, oh, online, we don't want that. DVDs are very good, thank you. And so we had tremendous resistance. So that was a lot of the early freedom, was trying to figure out, how do we convince these studio guys to give us a chance? How do we even deliver this? Because nobody had broadband. Like too many people still had dial-up or really slow. So we couldn't stream them. And so we're like, well, now what do we do? So we had to set up a system where you started a download of a movie. Like you want to watch something tomorrow night, you start a download of it tonight and it'll be done in 24 hours because people's networks are really slow. So it was, honestly, you told the good part, which is I helped start Amazon Prime Video. The bad part is, like, the first year of the business, it was a very bad business because we only knew how to download stuff to people's PCs, and people don't want to watch a movie in their den on their particularly older like PC screen. They want to watch on their big screen in their living room. Well, we didn't know how to get it from your PC to your living room, right? So the first year our business didn't do that well because A, it was new, and B, we weren't in the living room yet. Like, yes, technically we were selling you movies in your house, but in reality, it was going to wherever your, not even laptop. Most people have desktops.
So a conversation that Greg and I have quite a bit is that you throw the ball to where the receiver's going as opposed to where they are right now. When you have communication with movie execs, I want you to take us there, that you're selling them on a concept of where they're going to go as opposed to where they're at. How do those conversations and negotiations, how do they go? Is it that you roll in with a new idea? Hey, we're going to stream this movie. It doesn't seem like it would go very well because there was no precedent for it.
Yeah, so the huge discussion there was all about DRM, basically. What DRM stands for Digital Rights Management, but it's anti-copying or anti-theft software. And at the time, the movie execs were just terrified that their movies would be copied and given away for free in China and all this stuff. And so we had to work long and hard with them to convince them that A, this wasn't a huge problem. B, they didn't want to be left behind, like lots of things. But it was this process of convincing them that it was safe to test. And a lot of what they were willing to do was to give us not their best movies, not their best. Like, they're like, okay, would you be interested in all the seasons of The Honeymooners, which is like a 1950s TV show? Because they felt like, well, we've already sold the DVDs of that, and like we'll test it, or like we'll test it with MASH. And I'm naming all these 1970s hits because that's what they were like. The 70s are now long gone. We've sold all the DVDs to the people who like want that. Can we test it with that? And I remember, if you've ever seen a movie, and you may not have, it's a movie about, basically drinking wine in Napa called Sideways.
It showed in Lompoc or in Solvang where I grew up. Yeah, I know exactly what it is. Yeah.
I didn't know you were from Solvang. That's fascinating.
Lompoc, but it's right in that area. Yes.
Yeah, well, Solvang would be a very strange childhood. all Danish all the time. Anyway, side note. Everybody who's listening can go look it up on a map and you'll get the point. It's like a fake Danish village, or like it's a Danish village in Southern California. It's very unusual. It's Danish, right? I have that part right. Yeah. So anyhow, for people, I lost it. What did you ask me?
We were talking about, and you said that Sideways was one of the first movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was when Netflix debuted their streaming service. The best movie they could get was Sideways, which Sideways is a fine movie. But if you think of like all the hit movies in history, you love Star Wars. I know you talk about Star Wars. It wasn't exactly like Lucasfilm was like, well, let's just, put the Star Wars franchise on there. That'll work great. They were like, no, you can have Sideways. So convincing the people was building, and I guess this works with human behavior, right? It was, let's start slow. Let's walk before we run. There's a first date and a second date. You're not going to meet my parents until, the 13th date. That's how that went. Is they were very much willing to give us only kind of old stuff. We actually, as a test, digitized some 1920s era silent films, like Charlie Chaplin, vaudeville kind of stuff, because black and white, because they're like, well, try this. And we're like, all right, we'll try that. And that's why you can understand we kind of had a bad business, because people like you and me weren't that excited. Like, I know, what am I going to do tonight? I don't want to watch anything from Marvel. I want to watch a 1920s silent film.
Help me too, because was it 13 startups that you were a part of before Amazon?
No, it was more like 3 or 4.
Okay, 3 or 4. So, but the startup life is, a lot of my friends who are in the startup side, they almost don't want to go to a place that is more established. And that is a
Uh-huh.
transition for them. Talk about that transition for us, because in that startup life, there's the excitement. I'm trying things out. I don't have to deal kind of almost with the corporate structure. And then you go to a place that obviously wasn't as established as it is now,
Mhm.
but it was more established. How was that transition for you?
Well, that's right. And that's why I said I was worried. Am I joining the IT department of a bookstore? I was worried, like, oh, big company. It's funny. Amazon was about 10,000 people when I joined, which just sounded so big to me because I was working in a company of like 25. And so I'm like, 10,000. Oh my God. And now, it's 1.5 million. And so, I thought it was big, and then I got to learn what big really looked like. Um, so the good news though is Amazon had this really unique model where they're really a collection of lots of little startups glued together by a common purpose. And so they have this model called a two pizza team. And the idea was your team should have everything it needs to succeed and should be no bigger than can be fed by two pizzas. And that was like and we're like, well, how big are these pizzas? Are they thick crust? But it meant like 8 or 10 people, right? 8 or 10 people, two pizzas. So, we were, it was a startup within a startup, and I was pretty free mostly. You would occasionally run into things that were ridiculous because of the big company would come crashing in. So we're running, we have these ideas, we're getting movies, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then we have to be able to show our stuff as a part of what's called the Amazon catalog. You've got to be able to find it on Amazon and search for it and like, okay, these are the movies you can rent or watch. How do we do that? They go into what Amazon calls the catalog, which just like an old print catalog, there's a big computer file, essentially a database of everything Amazon sells. Well, the guy who ran that was like, oh, we have a lot of people wanting to add new things to the catalog. We can get to you next year. Like, we can put you on the list and just wait a year and we'll add you. And I'm like, so my job depends on launching this in 6 months. So that's not really going to work for me. And he's like, sorry, I hear you, but I can't do anything about it. There's a line and you're at the back. So the story that comes out of this is we started scratching our head, like, how can we work around this? Well, if you think about a TV show has seasons, and then within the seasons, it has episodes. So to explain, like, oh, we're going to watch, pick something like modern, like Jack Ryan, which is an Amazon show. The top level is Jack Ryan, and then there's seasons of Jack Ryan, and then episodes. How can you represent that? We started thinking, well, like, what else is like that? And we realized clothing is like that. So, like, I'm wearing, this Tommy Bahama sweatshirt, and you can describe it as like, oh, it's a Tommy Bahama sweatshirt, and it's got different colors. So I have the purple one, and then there's different sizes, like small, medium, large. So the way we worked around it is we took dresses, and all of our TV seasons were like under the covers. They were dress size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get like episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we stuffed our movies into the clothing catalog and then like changed the names. So it didn't say, like Laura Ashley dress or something. It said, Matlock or some TV show.
Yeah.
So that's where the big company did get in the way. You ask about the transition. If I'd have been dealing with that all the time, I'd have gone nuts. The great thing about going to a big company is you weren't always looking over your shoulder of when are we going to run out of money. Because, of course, startups are always looking at the piggy bank they've, some investors or angels or somebody's given them a little bit of money. The way those people on purpose do that, and I'm sure you know this because you talk about startups, they only give you enough money to get you started, but they want to keep you scared because they figure you'll work harder. And so they're like, well, we're going to give you money for, 6 months and then we'll check in. And so you're like, oh my God, I have 6 months. And that's how they motivate. Well, it's true. That is motivational. But if you're running scared all the time, you eventually get exhausted.
Yeah.
And the great thing about Amazon is you could run at a measured pace knowing that like bankruptcy wasn't 6 weeks away. And so that was that, there's a benefits and drawbacks for sure.
How'd you deal with the incremental velocity, right? So when you start at 10,000 employees, you fast forward and technology moves so quickly. 5 years from that point, when you're in 5 years, you're not at 10,000 employees and you're not working at that speed. By the time that you retire, we were talking about it earlier, you were dealing with over 1 million people in the full company. How do you continue to adjust and stay relevant as opposed to becoming that guy that says, oh, back in my day, it was like this?
That is tough. And there are a lot of people talking online today and my old colleagues about how Amazon has slowed down under its own weight just because it's so huge and so many layers now. When I joined, I was 3 steps from Jeff Bezos. So I had a boss and he had a boss and then it was Jeff. And I ran a team of 6 people when I began. So it was my 6 people, then me, then this other 2 people and Jeff. And when I left, I had been promoted twice and it was still, I was a VP and there was a VP above me and an SVP and Jeff, I had 800 people. So I was still 3 steps away, but all the people below me were like more and more steps away. And so that slowed down decision-making because I went in as a middle manager and I could still like talk to the CEO. And now people who would join the company at my level would probably never even get into the room with the current CEO. Like they'd never even, other than maybe like in an arena full of people for an all hands meeting, they'd never be in the same room. So there has been some slowing down. How you stay relevant yourself is you've got to be constantly learning. We call it, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, drinking from the fire hose. You've got to be continually updating yourself. I think my biggest learning experience later in my career, Amazon bought the game streaming company Twitch. And I chose to move to Twitch. I was about 45 and I took a role with Twitch and our average customer was about 19, right? It's gamers at home. And so, when I would go on screen or go somewhere, they'd be like, what's grandpa doing here? Because my hair was starting, it wasn't this white, but my hair was starting to go white. And they're like, wow, where'd we unearth this geezer? And I'm like, I'm 45, I'm not dead, but I was older than many of our customers' parents. And so I often say that job made me 5 years younger while I spent 5 years there getting 5 years older because I left there when I was close to 50. And so, but it was just being exposed to a completely different culture. The idea that, for example, people could earn a living being professional gamers. And just funny stuff you would never imagine. Like I'm sure you've seen, the little hand warmer packs you can use like when you're skiing or your fingers are cold. Professional gamers between rounds are holding on to those to warm up their tendons so that their fingers are faster, right? They're warming up their tendons so you can determine in some games who's likely to win literally by who can make more keystrokes per minute. Is like you were talking about throwing the football to where the receiver is going to be. And like a stat for a receiver is you can run a 4.4 second 40-yard sprint. Well, in the video game StarCraft, you need to be able to make 400 keystrokes a minute to be competitive. And so that's like the equivalent stat is 400 keystrokes a minute. And if you can't do it, So you better warm up your fingers. You learn stuff like this. You got to be learning, and
Where did you?
you gotta find that cool.
Yeah. Well, Evan, or Ethan, where did you find the that type of wherewithal? Did that come from your parents as far as the continual learning? Because there's times where people are in a continual learning state and then they almost pass it, and they become the get off my lawn. It used to be but you're constantly evolving. Before we even started, you coming from an engineer background, you were telling me about marketing, but you were learning the marketing from gaming.
Yeah.
Where did the constant learning come from? Where did that foundation? Where'd you learn it?
It's definitely my family. I grew up on a farm in Ohio, but my dad's actual job was as a chemist. So the farm was like a hobby. So I got to grow up, with cows and horses and whatever. But the money came from the fact he was a chemist for a paper company. So I was around a family that was well educated. I was the youngest child. Both of my sisters had gone to college. And so education was sort of assumed. And I had all the time in the world to be curious. Because I lived out on a farm, I wasn't sort of surrounded by a big social circle. And so I spent all my time reading, a lot of my time reading. And my parents were always willing to supply me with books, either from the library or the bookstore. So I sort of developed this taste for learning. And now, for sure, I wish I could live 5 or 10 lives and be a physician and an explorer. And, because my family had some doctors in it, not my immediate parents, but there were some, like my uncle was a medical doctor, things like that. I'd love to do that too. But, you have to pick one life, sadly. So I'm just very curious about that stuff. As for where I got it, is definitely the childhood environment, because my dad used to take the newspaper back when those things existed, and he would find a graph in it, because he got the Wall Street Journal, and it always had a graph on the first page, and he would ask me to explain it to him. Like, can you tell me what this means? And so obviously I don't have a traditional background. If at 7, 8, 9, I'm being shown the Wall Street Journal and being asked to explain what the chart means. That isn't maybe where the heartwarming stories most people tell about their dad don't involve the Wall Street Journal.
In the startup life, how do you manage a marriage? Because the startup life, right? And I don't know, were you married when you were during the startup time?
I was, but
Okay.
this is a story I've shared publicly that didn't end well, and I ended up being divorced.
How much do
Not
you
directly though, because of the startup pressure.
Okay. It wasn't. Okay. But in those kind of things, because when there's high risk, I mean, obviously people can look at you now and say, oh man, as a vice president for Amazon, you retired at a very young age.
I did.
Not to the gamers, to the gamers, they thought that was here's
Way
this.
too old.
Yeah. But you retired at a very early age. Someone could look at that part and be like, oh, yeah, that's what I want. But they don't see the risks that you had to take early on to be able to get to a point where you get to enjoy what you enjoy today. What are some of those things what are maybe some of the lessons that you learned, or how was that, in relationships?
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions there. I went through basically 4 startups early in my career. Each of them ended with something going wrong. My first startup, I got put under a sort of hostile boss, where there was reorganization. A new guy came in. He was political. I had to leave. My second real startup hit the rocks in hard times. Economically, the dot-com crash, and I was laid off. My third startup was right after 9/11. And again, because the economy went down when the towers went down, I was laid off. And my fourth startup is the last one. But while that sounds bad, in each of those, they had periods of optimism and high growth. And so I was able to grow a lot. I was able to go from being an engineer to being a manager in the first startup, and then a manager to a director in the second startup, and a director to a vice president in the third startup. Now, being a vice president in a startup is not like being a vice president at Amazon. At Amazon, I had 800 people and billions in revenue. And in the startup, I had like 25 people and we lost money. So there was a difference, but I held that title. And that's how I learned. For the relationship piece, my first wife and I evolved. We were both in startups together in the beginning, different startups, but doing the same thing. And so we were really excited about it. And then that worked really well. What didn't work, without going into lots of details, is I married an extrovert who needed to be out in society. Okay. We had strong beliefs about how to raise children. We adopted a little girl from China, my daughter, and my wife quit her job to be home with our daughter, believing that was the right thing to do. And I, agree with that, except it took an extrovert who'd been in a sales position and put her at home with a 1-year-old. Oh. And that was a mismatch, right? Because what happened was I would come home from a day working at a startup, kind of like I want to lay with my tongue hanging out the corner of my mouth. And she's like, I need you to replace the stimulation I used to get from 8 hours of sales meetings. Yeah. And like looking for me to, and I'm sad that, that ultimately led to the demise of our marriage. It's been long enough. She and I can talk about it. And just, even though we were trying to do the right thing, in our case, the right thing would have been put our daughter in daycare so that she could maintain her career, because when I was supposed to stand in for that whole career, it wasn't a fit.
Yeah.
So it's not directly the startup pressure, it is the family pressure. So I think if you want advice there, it's understand what your spouse needs and don't get overly sucked into, well, we believe this way of parenting or that way of parenting is right. It's important, obviously, to care about how you parent, but you also have to care about, like, what do you each need in order to thrive? And that's where we made a mistake.
So I was just having a conversation with my daughter this morning. We were driving to school, and her little friend is in the back, and my daughter says to her friend, are you going to drop? And they were talking about AP Euro. And I was like, it's almost halfway through the quarter, but she said she was going to drop it. And I thought I wasn't allowed to drop things in high school, but then I just asked the question, like, what do you mean? She's like, well, I don't seem to have enough time for it. So, and it's putting a lot of undue pressure on me. I need to drop it. In my head right away, I wanted to go into judgment because I was only thinking about my own scenario, but help me with this, Ethan, because when she said, hey, I'm going to drop it because of the pressure, when do you know when to apply the pressure that will create something great, or to be able to alleviate the pressure to be able to help the person to grow?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure there's a single answer, but what I've realized as a leader is that what we ask is more important than what we say. Leaders and parents, we want to feel wise, and we feel like, oh, I want to say, I want to tell. I want to tell you what I did. I want to tell you what you should do. And instead, it's much wiser to ask a few questions, like, what about this class is putting you under pressure? Or what are you struggling to find time for? Why have you chosen to drop AP history versus dropping something else? There are lots of questions, like, what would it mean if you stayed in the class but accepted a B? Like, I'm sure you want to get all good grades, but would you be better off fighting through and maybe getting a lower grade? There's a lot of, so I would I would try to ask questions and start a discussion. But I would begin by saying, I'd also begin by being supportive and saying, well, if you ultimately want to drop AP Euro history, I trust you. But can we talk a little bit about why you're choosing that first? I'm really curious what's stressing you out so much, or what aren't you finding time for? And then you get a discussion going, because if you get into, I think you should stay in it, now it's, you want to stay and you want to leave and I want you to stay and we're fighting. So I would ask questions.
It's right in line. You and I were talking before, and I said, you're killing me sometimes, because I want now to read more than I've ever wanted to read, because when I see your posts on LinkedIn, for me, when I'm watching them, or your blog, your newsletter, anything that comes from you always creates a discussion. Is there a pattern on how to create that? Because I was reading it the other day, and most of the people that they're just laying out their opinion. You have this way, Ethan, on being able to, you lay out an opinion of yours, which it's there, I see it, but then you get everybody else talking about it. How do you work that?
Well, you're right. It's very purposeful. And almost every post I write ends with a question. And that's me starting that discussion by asking something. And I'm asking a question I legitimately care about, because what I've realized is, maybe because I have a lot of experience and I was in very good companies, I know more about leadership and whatever the topic is than most of my readers. But I don't know more than 1,000 readers put together. And so I really am curious, because I get all these different opinions. And the great thing about LinkedIn is I now know people everywhere in the world. I recently connected to someone who's a government official in the government of Mongolia. But he speaks English, or at least reads and writes English. And he reached out to me, and I'm like, Mongolia, okay, I got to talk to this guy. Because, what a wild place I've never been to, and it'd be cool to go, and horsemen and arrows and Mongols. So, he's going to have a very different perspective on leadership than I am. And, people from different backgrounds, different cultures, I can't possibly know everything it's like to try and be a leader as a Black woman, or try and be a leader as someone from India. Or, I was talking to a friend of mine recently. English was his 5th language, because he grew up in India learning 4 Indian languages first, and English was his 5th language. And so what's it like for him to be a leader? So I ask those questions, and I give people space, and then almost I try to follow up and join the conversation, and I try to almost always appreciate their perspectives. Even if I disagree with them, I will end up saying, well, I can see your viewpoint, or I agree with this part of what you said, but I have questions about this other part. So that's how I start the discussion. But you've got to put something out there that people want to talk about, that they find. Before we got on the show, you, I think, talked about how I tell it like it is. My opinions are usually slightly edgy, because I feel like a value I can provide is to peel off the niceties that HR, human resources, or public relations tries to sugarcoat everything. And I strip off the sugarcoating and say, here's the bitter pill. Let's talk about it.
What's the bitter pill right now when you're looking and pertaining to leadership?
There can be several, but I think the bitter pill that I focus on a lot right now is called return to office. Whether or not people need to go to the office 5 days a week. Some companies have pushed very hard and said, everybody's got to be back in the office. Some haven't. That's one bitter pill. I think another bitter pill is people have a lot of fear right now. They feel trapped in jobs, believing the economy is bad and they can't move. So they aren't getting promoted, or they've been put on a bad project, and they feel like I have to stay here, or they catastrophize, right? Um, if I leave my job, I'll never find another, and then we'll lose our house, and then my wife and my kids and I will be on the street, and maybe if they're from another country, and then we'll be deported. And it's like, not really. This is not actually. It's not gonna like there are not that bad. Yes, that could happen. It could. Very unlikely. So anyway, those are a couple of the bitter pills. I can talk more about them if you want, but those are a couple right now.
Well, when you talked about it earlier, where you were saying that, from an engineering standpoint, you said, stay in the dark room, eat some pizza, be by yourself. But you've created this way to take siloed communication, add technology to it, and and almost start to break those barriers down, where most of those times people just continue to make the silo. How can you use technology to help the siloed communication break open?
Well, what I learned at Twitch, the game site, was the brilliant thing about the internet is no matter what it is you love or care about. I always use, you'll like this, a Star Wars reference. I say, if you think Wookiee culture is the coolest thing ever, and that Wookiees and imagining Wookiee families and a Wookiee planet and talking about what that would be like, it's the coolest thing ever. In your town, there's nobody who cares. But across the internet, there's 50 people who are your people and care just as much about Chewbacca as you do. And you can find those people and talk to them about what you love, and they can be your online family. And then what happens is, when you need a job or you need, restaurant tips in a new city or whatever, you know people, those people still have jobs and they still eat out. So even though you might not think a bunch of Chewbacca lovers are a great network, those people have a whole other life and know tens of thousands of people between them, and they become your network. So what I tell people is, just find a topic you love and start sharing it. Start being your authentic self on the thing you love, and you will find the other people who love it. And for me, it's really easy because the dots feel really close together. I was at a famous company and I was a big leader, and I talk about leadership. But from Twitch, what I learned is you can build a culture around Pokemon, around, of course, things like politics or other hot topics, but Beanie Babies, there's somebody who cares about everything you care about. So you just share it and find your people. And it sounds easy when I say, well, you just share it and find your people. But that is the magic of the internet, is no matter where you share that, it can be TikTok, can be wherever, the algorithms will end up showing it to a few people who will hit like, and then the algorithm will look and say, well, who else likes stuff similar to this person who just liked your post? And that will bring you whatever, the Beanie Baby people, the fried green tomato people, whatever it is that you love. You can have a whole channel about chicken fried steak. Like, I can totally imagine how you can become, probably that person's already out there, who's the chicken fried steak guru of the internet, who goes around to diners and orders it and breaks it down and chats with the waitress. And you can see this, you know how to make content. That's what you do. But it's got to be something you love. So you better love you some chicken fried steak if that's where you're going.
What about when you run into a roadblock, right? And so we talked about it before we started recording. You were talking about Amazon merch, and you had let me know about a few things with Amazon merch that most of us aren't thinking about. We're just thinking, oh yeah, it burst onto the scene. It was a perfect idea that had perfect execution, and bang, now we get to have the shirts that we want and the merch that we want. Can you talk a little bit about some of the roadblocks and how you're able to work through them as opposed to use them as something that would divert you away from it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Merch by Amazon is where Amazon went into the t-shirt printing business. So there were lots of places that printed t-shirts, and it turns out the advantage Amazon had, something you already have heard me talk about, is Amazon Prime, where you can get your t-shirt printed anywhere, but we'll ship it to you overnight, and the other people are going to charge you for shipping, and it'll get there in a week. And so that was our advantage. But along the way, we hit lots of roadblocks. The roadblock I talked to you about is that t-shirt printing machines, it's not a common need. Like, most people don't have one in their garage, right? There's very few people who make them. And it turned out the only manufacturer, if I recall correctly, was in Israel, who made the kind of machine we needed. And when our business took off and it's like, oh, this works, we need to make more, they're like, well, we have a year-long backlog, for orders. You can't have more until a year from now. And so we're like, well, that doesn't really work. So we ended up actually finding some used on the market and buying them from other people, as I recall. But when you hit an obstacle, I guess, this goes back to the discussion we had about ownership, the very first thing where you poke the bear with me to start the conversation. You can either sit down, throw your hands up and be like, well, I guess it's a year, pass word up the chain, it'll be a year. Or you can decide, what am I going to do about it? And there's always something you can do. There's always, I just believe there's always one more thing you can do. This will feel like free association, but I once read a story about how in China, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a great story. They never assign responsibility for an auto accident only to one person. And there was this American there, and he was stopped at a stoplight, and somebody ran into him from behind. And when he went to court, they said, well, the person who hit you is 90% responsible, but you're 10%. And he's like, I was stopped at a stoplight not moving. How am I 10% responsible? And the judge said, well, if you hadn't have come to China, you wouldn't have been hit, would you? So you're 10% responsible. And what I like about this is realizing there is, even if it's a little far-fetched, there's always something you can do to change your situation. And I think a lot of people, it's not that I'm criticizing, because life can be very hard and wear you out. But if you find the energy inside yourself, there's always something you can change. And that's how I overcame roadblocks, is we just keep looking. And then I am willing to be a hacker. I definitely, when I tell that story about using dress size number 1 to represent TV shows, I've had engineers be like, oh, that's disgusting. What an ugly hack. Like, that's wrong. And you were polluting the data. And yeah, they're kind of right. Like, I was not doing good engineering, and I was making more work for the future where we'd have to undo that. On the other hand, my way of looking at it is I was making progress today. And yes, I was going to have to pay a bill tomorrow. That's like having a mortgage or buying a car on credit. I need wheels today. Going to take a loan and then figure it out. And I did a lot of that. Other people aren't as willing to sort of bend the rules of reality. So I guess, I'm very willing to play fast and loose with what's supposed to happen.
What do you think the top maybe 3 or 4 challenges that businesses have to be able to scale that are blocking themselves? Because people, you've seen it at scale. You've seen it at massive scale, probably one of the largest scales in the history of man. Right? And so when you look at a business and they have the components, maybe they have the product, maybe the marketing is there, all the stuff, but they just haven't put it together. What are some of those things that are blocking them?
It's such a broad question, not knowing a specific business circumstance, but the types of things that block, one is courage to take risk. So startups have already taken risk, but then they get very afraid of like, oh, we're going to run out of money or whatever. So once you sort of jump off the cliff, spending time worrying about the bottom is not it's already coming. Like, make the best of the flight down. That's one thing. I think a second thing, because I come from a tech world, people get enamored that technology is the solution. I think you mentioned your father said there's only one business, people. And we forget that people don't always need more technology. My favorite example of this right now, all of us grew up with you go to the bathroom and if you put the seat down and you let go of it, it bangs. And now somebody got smart. We've all used them or been in people's homes where they put, who knows, a spring or a piece of rubber in there. And if you push the toilet seat, it kind of oozes down, but there's no bang. Well, this is clearly better, right? People have been, I've seen them. The Romans had toilet seats carved in stone 2,000 years ago. So toilet seats are not a new thing, but someone made them better just in the last 5 or 10 years. And they probably made a lot of money because no one now would go and say, oh, I want the banging toilet, right? They want the good one. And so that person's making money off that. And I guess companies get sucked into it's got to be high tech. It's got to be low tech is fine if it's valuable. So the term for that I'm sure know is product market fit. It's figuring out what is the product that actually solves a real problem for a real person, not what is whizzy and has lots of colors. This is where I'm not a huge fan of cryptocurrency because I don't think too many people have figured out how to make cryptocurrency solve someone's real problem today. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need to take a ride. They're very excited about, crypto, Bitcoin, it's free. They haven't figured out how to actually make it do much yet. So getting stuck in, it's the cool new thing. What we're doing is a great example. This is a radio talk show, except it's not, it's a podcast. But even the mic you have is a throwback to 1930s radio, right? It's a beautiful, antique piece in appearance. It's a nod to something that's 100 years old. But you're doing it in a new way. And so you're just using enough technology to say, well, now I don't need a big antenna out my backyard. And good news, people will be able to hear this anywhere in the world as opposed to just in Poughkeepsie or Solvang, right? So overuse of technology and mistaking technology for value is a huge mistake of a lot of companies. The rest of what I'd say is just listening to customers. It's surprising how many people have a vision in their head of what they think would be cool, but they've never actually asked 10 real people, would you buy this? They're so convinced that what they want is what everyone wants. And that's where I think a lot of founders get in trouble is, on the one hand, you do have to have a new idea and you have to believe in it. But at some point, you also want to talk to customers and understand, do they have a real problem that you're trying to solve? Because so many startups, and some of my early startups that I was a part of that failed, we were building things we envisioned people wanted and nobody did. We had constructed in our mind an image of what was going to be valuable, and it was just our fantasy. So that's the biggest thing, is talk to real people. Do they want what you have? If they do, then you're onto something, and you can tune it and hone it and make it better and cheaper and whatever.
So Ethan, my pops used to tell me these things, and then I remember one time it was reiterated in the movie Saving Private Ryan, where Tom Hanks is they're walking through the field, and one of the guys asks him, "Hey, Sarge, do you believe it's right for all of us to go and get this one guy?" And he says, "Yes." And he gives him the canned response. And the guy said, yeah, that's a canned response. But what do you actually feel? And he turned to him, stopped, and it was a pretty pivotal point in the movie, for me at least. He said, even if I didn't agree with it, I would never tell you because I would always complain up. And it was one of the things that my pops taught me very early is be very conscious of how you treat leadership, because you never want to injure the position, because when you get into that leadership, that position, if you injured it, you're going to have to deal with the ramifications of your behavior. So most of the time we talk to leaders. This is the way you as a leader need to act. What about when we're fostering the environment and the culture of the people who are being led? What is that? What's that message that needs to be sent to them?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I spend a lot of time trying to help people understand the minds of leaders and how to work with them. And the first thing to understand is, you mentioned pressure. That leader has a lot of pressure, a lot of worries. They're desperate for help. And I teach people, it's surprising. The easiest way to stand out to a leader is go offer them help. I'm a little ahead today, or I have a few extra hours today, or I got caught up this week. What else could I help you with? Because most of the people are like, oh, I got a few extra hours. I'm going to, surf the web, or I'm going to duck out of here. Or I'm just going to sit and hope nobody notices. And if you actually go and offer help, you stand out right away. And the key thing to understand is, I've polled thousands of managers, first level managers, they just manage a team, by show of hands, and asked them, how often do people come and offer you help? How much would you like it? And I have never had someone say, oh, too many people offer me help, or my whole team offers me help, or they never have. So the easiest way to stand out is just go help out. I have a blended family. I have my daughter from my first marriage. My wife has kids from our second marriage. It's amazing, but our two oldest kids are well loved at their jobs for just two things: showing up on time and actually working, as opposed to being glued to their phones every time no one's looking. And it's dumb, but to stand out, just try and help out, find something to do, and now there are more advanced versions of this. So what I tell people, to really answer your question, is you can then ask your boss, if you have a relation, your manager, the leader above you, can say, look, can you tell me a little bit about what our group's trying to accomplish? Because I'll think about it with you. And if I have ideas, I'll share them with you. Or maybe if I see things that need to be done, I can do them without you needing to tell me. Because if the most magical thing is to be offered help, well, it's not the most magical thing, because even more magical is where you tell me, hey, I noticed this thing. Would you like me to do that? Because now you've helped me see it and offered to help. And then the top of this magic kingdom I'm describing is not Mickey Mouse. Instead, it's where you come and tell me, hey, I know we're trying to get this thing done, whatever it is. We're trying to build a widget. We're trying to please customers. I saw this thing that had to happen, and I've done it. I'm just letting you know it's handled. And now I'm like, take more money, please, because I want you, right? Because that is so magical as a leader, because you're handling things I didn't even know were going to be a problem. And then just telling me, oh yeah, there were 3 problems today. I handled them. Here's what I did. If you have any questions or wanting more details, I'm available. And I'm like, oh, wow. Because in the past, that would have been 3 disasters that would have come to my attention when people said, well, this blew up and that burnt down and this is late. Boss, what do you like? What do you want done? How are you going to clean up this mess? And you prevented it all for me. So of course I love you. And there's none of this is rocket science. It's actually funny. I put this in a draft of a book, and the book publishers have all told, not all, but several have told me, well, that's just common sense. I'm like, yeah, except it's apparently not that common. But they're like, well, it's not like this big revelation, this heavy stuff you're dropping on people. And I'm like, I don't, it's like the toilet seat. It's a pretty simple thing. We all use it, but only one guy thought, I can make this stop banging. And that's not just one example. Okay. indulge me a minute. We all also have taken showers in showers that have the straight shower bar and you're kind of squeezed in. And then we've gone to the one that has the curved shower bar where and there's a little more room. Again, I'm a historian of this. There have been shower curtains since at least the Old West. I traced them back to at least 1880. But curved shower bars showed up in our life. So again, 100 years later, like 1980 or something, somebody was looking and saying, if you just kind of bent this out, there'd be more room. There's so many inventions like this. One third example I'll give you is I was driving on the beach, near the beach here in Washington. Now, Washington beaches are cold and rainy, but they're still made of sand, and they're still pretty. So people still want to live there, even though like getting a tan is not a thing. Well, I drove by this really big house, and then I went into town, and I happened to ask someone, like, who's got the mansion? And the person knew. They said, you know what? The guy who owns that is the guy who came up with the idea. First, Band-Aids were all pink. The Band-Aid you put on, they made it pink so it would kind of look like your average white guy. And then they started trying to make Band-Aids in different colors, like, we should have brown ones and black ones. Well, this guy had the idea, you know what? If we just made the tape clear, it would match everybody's skin because it would be like the clear tape you use on Christmas wrap. So he's the clear tape Band-Aid guy. Huge beach house here in Washington. So you just have to solve problems real people need solved. And it turns out if you come up with something as simple as, the clear tape, or another famous story, everybody knows Post-it notes. Post-it notes came from someone creating a glue that didn't stick very well. But as opposed to throwing it out, they asked themselves, what could you possibly do? The point of glue is like super glue, right? It's supposed to hold two trucks together. What could you do with a glue that actually, won't even hold a piece of paper down if you blow on it too much? What would that be good for? But they found something.
I was talking with my buddy Michael yesterday, Michael Cruz, and we were talking about the startup phase, right? So you go in the startup phase, there's the fear of the bottom, which causes a lot of people to work hard, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the middle that you're like, I'm kind of comfortable, but I still remember the bottom, and it could come, although it probably isn't going to come tomorrow. Then there's this stage, and you've experienced all of them, where you get to a point where you're like, I know this place ain't going bankrupt and, ever, right?
Yeah.
How do you, when you get to that level, how do you continually manufacture pressure that is healthy for people to continue to innovate and not get lazy?
It's got to be vision and inspiration. People try and use the whip. They try and use fear of job loss or like, we'll pay you more. We know pay isn't a very good incentive. My favorite sort of guru on this, a well-known author, Simon Sinek, who wrote the book, Start with Why. You've got to tell people, why are we doing this? And that why doesn't have to be everything we do cures cancer. It can be, I've worked in video games. Video games are wonderful, but they're not directly making the world a better place. They're not feeding people, curing cancer, whatever, stopping war. But they are giving people pleasure in their day. And you have to find a way to describe to people, why should we bother to work hard on this? Why does it matter if we do it sooner or not? And, we had our stories that people could get behind. One of our stories was, hey, there are some people who want to be entertainers and they want to play video games for a living and entertain an audience with their expert play or their witty commentary or whatever. And we build the systems that let these people earn a living playing games and find an audience that they can bring a laugh to their day. And then we would bring those people in, and it was so powerful because they would be like, you changed my life. I was, like my son just finished up a job working for Jiffy Lube between college semesters. And he was saying, like, it's rainy season now. And I never thought about this, When the cars come in wet and you're under them changing the oil, you just have like dirty road crap falling on your head all the time. Well, you can imagine somebody being like, I was in Jiffy Lube, having dirty oil and road grit fall all over me all day. And now I'm sitting in my living room, making a living, playing games and making people happy across the world. We would bring these customers in. They would talk to our team and be like, you changed my life. Well, now my team's fired up because they're like, wow, we're heroes. Because we could bring them person after person who would tell them these stories. Another common story is like, I work for I work wherever. I work at Pizza Hut or I work at a manufacturing job all day and I come home tired. But then I get online, I get on Twitch, I start playing games, my community comes together, we have a good time together, and they support me enough that I can buy extra beer. You've made my life so much better because I used to come home from my job and play alone in a room and feel sad. And now I play with all my friends and they buy me beer. It doesn't have to be life-changing money, but when that person tells, they're like, you made my life so much better, that's what motivates people. Is they're like, we're not in a job. It's not our job is rot people's brains by providing video games. Instead, the narrative they tell themselves is, my job is making real people's lives better.
Wow.
And I do it every day. And then I don't have to get out the whip. I just remind them, well, our customers are waiting on this. Like do you remember Kelly? He's waiting for this. He sent me an email yesterday about how excited he is about what we're building next. And then they're on fire. Really? Kelly said that? I remember Kelly, they're all about it. That's how you inspire and lead from the front. The other thing is, I always have another thing. I'm sorry. I think a lot.
You're good.
Once a few people on the team are fired up, nobody else wants to be the curmudgeon, right? Like nobody, if you get part of the team fired up and going and one person's like, I don't know, I'd rather F off today. They feel out of place, right? It's like, it's just peer pressure. Everyone else is excited and bought in and you're the one like, oh, I don't know. That's a hard role. And most people get caught up and like, even if they're not truly enthusiastic, they're like, well, I like my team and I like my teammates, so I'm going to help them out. We're all in this together. People work for their friends. They don't work for a job. They work for the people.
When you guys were doing when you took the movies and put them in the chapters, which was genius, by the way. I mean, absolutely genius. You knew what was coming. For us as normal people, we were still like, oh my gosh, we're so excited that we could get a DVD in the mail or go to that Redbox thing. We didn't know it was coming. What are some of the things that are being worked on right now that we don't know that's coming that is going to literally be a normal thing in our life in the years to come?
Of course, the most obvious answer to this right now is AI and the things that AI will be able to do. But I'll give you a couple practical things I love about AI that are coming. Everyone has had that horrible experience where you get on the phone because you need help with something, a doctor's appointment or whatever, and they're like, we're experiencing very long wait times. Your wait will be approximately 58 minutes. Please hold. That will all go away because whatever it is you need done, which is scheduling an appointment or paying a bill or changing an airline ticket, AI can handle. And now if there's like a big storm and lots of flights are canceled, as opposed to having a 4-hour wait to talk to somebody, we'll just allocate more computers to that particular AI need, and your phone will be answered immediately and there'll be no waiting. So that's one example of what's absolutely coming that I can't wait for, because nothing sucks more than like, I have 10 minutes, I need to do whatever. And like, well, I could do that, except they're never going to pick up. All I'm going to do is spend 10 minutes on hold and have to hang up. If I try and come up with a AI example, I mean, I'm into a lot of, modern stuff, right? We had solar panels on our house, and I have an electric car. Probably you've driven an electric car, but anybody who hasn't, I wasn't all that into it until I realized how damn fast they are. Like they're just like rockets, The guy in the muscle car next to you is like, vroom, vroom, and you're like, my little silent electric thing can totally dust you if I want to, which is a fun thought. I think another thing I worked in with games, it is virtual reality. It doesn't work well yet. Not too many people want to, wear goggles, but that's coming. The day where you'll be able to have a pair of sunglasses on, but inside the sunglasses, it'll be able to do things for you. Like you'll meet somebody and you're like, oh, I know this guy, but what's his name? And it will just automatically, put somebody's name over their head for you, kind of stuff. Like that's the kind of magic that is coming. But we already have so much magic. I mean, I've told you about some magic I think is coming. I think there's also appreciation for the magic we have. So all the books are available. Things you can get books from centuries ago and they cost pennies or they're free. All the streaming music, of course, movies, which I was a part of. It used to be like if a movie was out of the theaters, it was gone. And if nobody had made a DVD, it wasn't available. Or if it wasn't in a Blockbuster had the common movies. But if you wanted something older or whatever, you weren't going to. Now, all of that, you can have anything you want, anytime you want. Great.
You said something before we started recording too, and I want to say it, and I want to hear your thoughts on it because it made me laugh, but it made it hit me in the face. Is that your boss isn't thinking about you?
Right. Absolutely. So people worry a lot. What's my boss think about me? We worry about this. It's common because what's the first thing we say after our names when we introduce ourselves? People ask us is, what do you do? Your job is so fundamental to your identity. Now that's a problem maybe, and we shouldn't do that, but it's a fact. And then we worry, how are we doing at our jobs? And no matter where you work, you have a manager and you tend to think like, are they going to give me a raise? Am I up for a promotion? Are they going to be down on me today? We spend a lot of time in our heads worrying. And we think that our boss is spending this time judging us all the time. And my point is, your boss is a human like you are. What's playing in their head at the same time is what's their boss think of them. Is the site supervisor or the VP or the director or the sales manager, what do they think of me? That's what they're worried about. And when they think of you, the first thing they think of is not, oh, Kelly, I'm worried about Kelly's career or I want to help Kelly. Instead, they think, how is what Kelly's doing reflecting on me? How is it making me look better or worse in front of my boss? So if you ever wonder why they're down on you, half of it is maybe you made a mistake or something, but half of it is they have a fear soundtrack in their head. Oh, Kelly's behind, and now my boss is going to get on me about it. Their first thought is not. Now, good managers do spend some time thinking about how to help their team. I'm just pointing out that managers are human too. This is something a lot of people want to dispute. No, they're ogres. They're busy worrying about their family and having to pick up their kids and what their boss thinks, and you get this little tiny slice. And that's why they're so appreciative if you offer them help, because they feel like they're dog paddling with bricks on their feet. Because we talked earlier about how pressure ripples down. The pressure starts at the top, but then it ripples down. The manager has a lot of pressures. They're worried about how they look and how they're doing and how they're being judged. And if you offer them a little bit of a hand, they're so grateful. Now, yes, people always ask, well, I once helped my boss and he didn't seem appreciative. There are mean bosses. There are also bosses who the first time you help them, their first thought is going to be, Kelly's never offered help before. what's his angle?
Mm.
Like, they just because offers of help are rare, and sometimes when people come and offer help, they're like, "Hey, boss, anything I can help you with? Oh, okay, I got you a soda. Can I have next week off?" Like, we get trained to be a little gun shy because sometimes the help is not just to help. It's people are about to drop something on us, so we do have a little bit like, is there another shoe about to fall? So it can take, you have to build that relationship. You have to build the trust. And no, actually, I want to do a good job. I want to be helpful. I actually don't like just sitting around here, surfing Facebook and rotting my brain. So I'd rather do something useful. What do you need? That is so rare, but it stands out so much.
A question that I had for you is, you had mentioned something that was very interesting when we talk about, Prime Video, and we talk about Twitch and all these things that you've done, and discovering the moon. In a leadership position, firing people is something that has to happen. In a company of a million, there probably are some really cool and funny stories of how people get themselves fired. Do you want to elaborate on that, Ethan?
So it is funny. People, the biggest joke I tell is I once ran a office where we brought in someone transferred in to be our HR business partner, and she had worked in one of our distribution centers, one of our warehouses, and a couple of funny warehouse stories, and then I have another really good one from that site about someone who didn't get fired, and you'll be like, you didn't fire them? So in the warehouse, why do people get fired? Well, the first reason is simply not showing up. So everybody can imagine, like, oh, people don't show up, they get cut. The second reason is trying to steal stuff. But the number 3 reason cracks me up. I'll use a careful word here, is copulation in the workplace. People sneak off behind the shelves with somebody they've met and hook up. And like, come on, really? But it's the number 3 reason. Number 3, it happens a lot. And these warehouses are big, and so I'm sorry, I'm be a little graphic. Hopefully you can always edit it out. If you ever get anything sticky from Amazon, I'm really sorry.
Oh my gosh. It's really number 3.
That's what she told me. And,
oh my
and my wife worked in a different industry in a warehouse. She worked for Target, and she basically confirmed that this is a real thing because the warehouses are so big, they're millions of square feet. People think they can get away, and they forget the whole roof is cameras. And so, right? Like they don't think about, like, this giant roof is covered with cameras. Everything is being filmed to prevent theft. So yes, they do see you, back in the inflatable mattress section, right? Like, so that's one funny story. But the story I love the most is, again, I worked in video games, and as you know, a lot of video games involve shooting people, right? They're violent. They're so-called shooters. Well, we were working on a game that had combat in it, and we employ artists, and artists draw, but they often draw from models. So one day, word came up through the chain to one of my managers, not to me directly, but it came to him and it said, we think Kelly has a bunch of guns in his cube. And so HR and my guy who works for me go down, and indeed, Kelly's desk is covered with actual guns, right on it, all over his desk. And the story is, Kelly's an artist, and he's working on a shooter game, and so naturally to him, not thinking anything of it, he grabbed his gun collection and laid it out on his desk so he could make some new gun models. Never thinking that, like, other people walking by his cube are not going to, they're going to be like, oh shit, we're about to be on the 6 o'clock news. Run. Kelly slipped the gear and it's about to be bullets for everyone. So our HR person is like, we need to fire him immediately. And my my manager, luckily, is a little bit cooler headed. Is like, I think this was stupidity, not malice. They grabbed him and basically said, please take these home immediately and never do this again. But it is one of those things where people are like, he had his blinders on. I'm an artist. Artists use models. I'm bringing my models in. ABC, no, nothing out of line. Where like anybody else is like, so you brought 10 guns to your work and laid them out on your desk. What could go wrong with this? This is a true story. True. And that's like my favorite. Totally. So people get themselves fired. I have a friend, I'll tell one more story. I have a friend, he got upset about something in our policies at a company, and he called a reporter to complain about the policy. Well, once the article ran, the company was able to figure out, it's not hard. You go back through the phone records, who called the reporter. Like, we know what reporter wrote it. We can find out their phone number. So he got fired, right? Because, and when I talked to him about it, he at least could see like, okay, that was really dumb. But at the time, he thought like, this just sucks so bad. I got to tell somebody. I'm going to tell this reporter, and they're going to write it. He told himself a hero narrative, which was, I'm going to put this in the paper, and that's going to cause the company to change what it's doing. And I'm going to be a hero because I shed light on this mistake and I righted the wrong. And what he got was the lesson that, no, the company's not going to change what it's doing. Instead, you're going to change where you work, by the way, today. So these are just things people do. And I don't know how much time you have. I have lots of.
Ethan, I started the podcast because of my 2 kids, right? And so I have Maddox and McKenna, 15 years old and 13 years old. She's in theater, he's in sports, and I didn't want them to worship idols. I wanted them to see a Ethan Evans of the world and say, you know what, he's a person, and he's an iconic person. But it means that if he did that, it's possible, right? Mm-hmm. And so what advice would you have for Maddox and McKenna? And if you could use both their names, it would be awesome.
All right. So my advice for Maddox and McKenna is, well, I've given it in a sense, begin with show up and work. When you get in a career, or you're going to go to college soon, you're in high school now, actually go to class and do the homework. Again, this is revolutionary college advice for people, or even high school, because see, we have a culture that will teach you, Maddox and McKenna, that the cool thing is to cut school and do as little as you can and skid by. That only works so long, and you can get like a McDonald's job kind of doing only what you have to. But if you want to do something more, you actually have to decide that you want to put effort into it. And so start that process early. Second, almost all sort of rags to riches stories begin with showing up and trying. I made so many mistakes, and I never imagined I would be an executive. I worked at all these startups. Instead, what I thought was, I'm going to work at a startup and the stock's going to go ballistic and I'm going to retire at, 28 on an island. Like I had, but what I did do was put in the effort and learn. So find something you love, because, hey, I am the guy who helped video gamers get paid for playing video games. You can do anything if you're good at it, really good enough that someone else will pay you to do it. And so find that thing you love there's an idea that I really love that will help you, which is if you're working at something you don't like, then it's great to be disciplined and do it well. But if you can move to where you're working something you love, then work is like play. It's not actually effort. And so you can work all day and it just feels like you're playing. So I think your dad, who asked me to speak to you, is doing that. He's doing things that don't feel like work to him. It's fun to get on a podcast and talk to people and smile and chat. He likes it. Now, sure, some days it's still a drag to go to the studio. I get that. But mostly he loves it, so it's easy for him. Same for me, what I do. It's easy for me. Occasionally, of course, you don't feel it. But most of the time, it's like I get to talk to people, help them with their lives. I love my work. Find that for you, and you can make a ton of money while enjoying yourself. And that's the real. So that's a lot of advice. It begins with get up and go to class.
Hey, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I'd like to have you in the future also. Because I think there's so many more things that we could discuss. So many funny stories. You help me to see that leadership from a different angle. You have this uncanny, and I told you this before. But you have this uncanny way of being able to speak to all levels in a company, and all of them think that you're speaking directly to them. And you get us all saying, yeah, it's because like I'm a leader, so you guys all need to do this. And then you bring the knockout blow at the end saying, no, you need to do that. And I don't understand. I'm going to continue to study you. I'll figure this out. But you have that ability. It's unreal. And I'm so proud to call you my friend.
Well, Kelly, I'm proud to call you a friend as well. I appreciate being invited on your podcast. I'd be happy to return sometime. I love to chat with people, help them. You opened by talking about Proverbs. For me, the Bible verse I think about a lot is to whom much has been given, from him much will be required. And I've had a life I never anticipated. So much has been given to me. And so I think a lot about how to pay that forward, how to do right by others. Because while I don't live in fear of judgment, I do think about how will I answer for what I did with the gifts I was given. Again, we all know the parable. There is a parable of Jesus where he gives 3 different people different amounts of money to invest, and 2 of them go invest it and make more. And one guy says, well, I buried your coin in a hole because I know you're a harsh master and I didn't want to lose your coin. And he says, I am a harsh master because you didn't turn my coin into more. I'm still going to punish you. Wow. You didn't. And I think about that. I've been given a coin, but how am I going to make it into more for others? Yeah. And so that's why I love to talk to people, and I really appreciate the chance to share things with you.
Well, it's incredible, too. This is a thing that I didn't talk to you about or even tell you about, but I do this study of Proverbs every day, so it's the corresponding proverb, corresponding day. That's how we connected, right? So the thing that I didn't tell you is today's proverb was it was titled "Listen to Me, Boy," and I didn't say Leroy because that's what my pops used to say to me. And he used to tell me these lessons that I would be like, yeah, whatever, Dad, whatever. Then when he passed away, I realized a lot of the things that he was saying was laying a foundation. And he was talking about little principle based. And if you go back when you get time, when you go back and listen to your answers and the things that you talked about, you said, I'm going to paraphrase you, stay away from the shiny part of it because it's not always the shiny. Sometimes it's the toilet seat that goes down low. Sometimes it's the shower curtain that opens up. And so this was what he ran down. I wasn't going to run it down, but since you mentioned it, I wanted to run this down in Proverbs 7. Keep them and store them up, read them, write them, and speak them. And you reiterated that today, that as far as those type of principle things are the same in a startup as they are in the middle, as they are in, the stratosphere where you live now. Wisdom and insight will guide you. So as opposed to, again, looking to the shiny, that you're looking to the things that actually matter and that will work. In a world of distractions, wisdom will give you clear vision. And you reiterated that again, your clear vision on leadership, on, building a company, on relationship, all these things. It was incredible. And then it said at the end, and you finished with this, right? And this was written at like 7:00 this morning before you and I got to talk.
Yeah.
Is read it, write it, speak it, and then do it. And the simplicity of that, if you go back and listen to your advice to my kids, that's paraphrasing what it is that you did. And so at the end, it just said, listen to me, boy. I didn't say Leroy. And so
Nice.
It's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're incredible. You're better than advertised too, man.
Oh, well, all right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I struggle to hear strong praise from others because I do think of myself as a regular person who works hard and had a lot of luck and help, but also worked hard. But I don't think of myself, to your point, I think other people can do what I did. They just have to put in the effort, which is hard. There's a lot of things that hold you back in life. Keep getting up when you get knocked down. I got laid off twice in my career. The first time right after I had adopted, I mentioned my wife had left her job to be with her daughter, and then I got laid off. And so we went from 2 incomes in a period of like 6 months. We went from 2 incomes to no income, but you can get back up. We did. So get back up. If you're feeling down, get back up. What are you going to do? Lay there all day, all life? Just lay there and die? Well, all right. You don't have to. Get back up. All right.
You're incredible, man. If you're watching a video right now on Amazon, like at home with your kids, it's because of this guy. If you're enjoying gaming and you're making a living at it, that's because of this guy. I mean, honestly, if you see the moon, he discovered it. We talked about it earlier. So, Ethan, it has been my absolute pleasure having you here. We're going to run a commercial. Can you stay until the commercial's done?
Absolutely.
Is that cool? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Ethan, you're officially off the hot seat.
Nothing more on my mind. I got 2 shines, so every day I grind. Work in the morning, work in the evening. We's achieving, cause we believing. It's for certain, we put the work in. We ain't stopped just because it's hurting. Right before your eyes, so it's coming to no surprise. The takeover is televised. Over and over and over again. Make no mistake, we continue to